Okay, apparently I'm live. Welcome everyone. This is a short video outlining best practice for designing a PowerPoint in Cumberland's LiveStream platform. It's a how-to. It is not meant to limit what you can do, but instead allow more insight into what works and what doesn't. What we'll do for now is we'll just open with a quick prayer before we get underway. Our Lord God, we come before you now to thank you so much for the time we have to consider best practice in our live streaming, to be able to support not only our members here at our ecclesia, but also many, many more. We pray that you may help us understand, help us be respectful, and think carefully about how we might be able to apply this in what we do. And so we look for your blessing on tonight and come before you through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, something went a bit fishy with my connection, but that was the prayer. And that's me. Hello. So with everyone watching from home, it's becoming more important than ever to get our presentations right, to find that balance between the amount of information on the slides and the ability to see the presenter at the same time. This is going to work in the following way. I'll endeavour to outline the principles of good presentations and then some practical ways of actually doing that or setting it up on both Apple Keynote and Microsoft PowerPoint, probably not in that order. I've sought and gained permission from various speakers of recent presentations here at Cumberland to use some screenshots of their presentations and to show you some real-life example of what works and what may not. The point is not to target the speaker at all for their ability or inability thereof, but rather to demonstrate how we as presenters can do well in the future now that we know more about it. And it's starting to annoy me that my presentation keeps doing that. Okay. Basic principles. We need room for your face, and we would like widescreen 16:9 slides, and of course as big as font as possible. Widescreen, room for your face. What I mean by that is one of the corners of your 16:9 PowerPoint slide can have your image as I have in front of you. If you leave room on each of your slides for that image, it means A, it makes our job easy for streaming, and B, makes the viewers at home more involved in your presentation. With widescreen slides, this is specifically because of the software we use and the fact that we're streaming to YouTube. Not to mention the projector at our hall also works best with 16:9 slides when we're back in business. So I'll show some examples of why I think 4:3 slides aren't so good. But in principle, widescreen actually gives you more room to put your text and such like, and it looks better. As big font as possible and keep it simple. Now, due to the nature of the content we show, this isn't always possible. We often have a lot of complicated things to get across, or maybe a whole bunch of text or such like. But as a presenter, it is up to you to work out what is best for your presentation to keep not only the audience engaged, but for people at home to be able to read it on a small screen potentially. So because of the fact we don't have an audience here looking at a huge projector screen behind us, we need to think carefully about the sort of devices they could be using. So big text helps make that possible. Some other principles. Now these are could-haves. The previous ones were must-haves, because I think they're really important. The could-haves are just more room for your face. So I've got almost half or a quarter of the slide, I guess. Now, practically, that's not going to work for every speaker. In fact, it probably won't. But the more room you can leave, the bigger we can make you and the more involved you can be for those at home. Dark backgrounds are good, and the reason dark backgrounds are nice is so you can read something like this, which is behind your face. So you can read something like this behind where your face normally is. There you go, I can't even read it, but I can make it darker. And that allows us to fade in and out if you have too much stuff on your slides, or one or two of your slides instead of all of them. The dark background works most effectively with this. A white background doesn't because, it just makes it really grey and hard to read, but it can still work. Just nowhere near as well. Simple graphics are such that they can be useful. They often paint more of a picture for what you want. There's been heaps of good examples recently. I can think of David Finnan, Tony Lyons and more who have used some very neat and useful graphics in their PowerPoint. I say simple because the more complicated they are, the more distracted the viewers will be of your presentation. If you want them to focus on what you say, have less on the slides for them to be distracted by. Slides are best used to portray the most important points. So I have my 4 dot points on the screen, and I try and explain them as best I can separate to that. There are also some video or audio files when you have permission to use them for whatever that may be. We have the capacity at Cumberland to do that. At the moment, we have to use an auxiliary cord because we can't seem to get sound out of our HDMI as we used to. We're working on that. But still, it's a good way to keep your audience engaged if you're using multimedia platforms. So they're my basic principles. I had a couple more that I was going to mention, and that's to do with microphones. So I've noticed recently that some microphones are getting on good, others are not. More and more, we actually will be able to go as a lapel because, bear with me, because I'm looking less this way and that way, because there's no audience, I can look straight ahead, and as I look up and down, it'll be less of a problem. I still prefer centre, but that's just my own opinion. If I speak into it, it's obviously louder. So that's sort of, the position of the microphone will really help with the sound. If it's pointing the wrong way, the sound is quite different. You'll probably hear quite a muffly sound at the moment. It's certainly not as loud on my information in front of me. So just be mindful that the microphone needs to point at your mouth. Wherever it is, it needs to point towards your mouth. It can be a lot closer if you like. The streamer will compensate accordingly. But if you happen to look down at the same time, it's going to be much louder. And I had to speak quieter for that, actually. So general principles, which you'll appreciate just from common sense. So, recent presentations, what have they looked like? We'll start with the not so good, unfortunately. So this is Jamie's talk on LOT. I'm going to remove my face, sorry. Study 5. Now, what do you notice? There's some black lines down the side. There's nothing we can do about that because our software only takes 16 to 9 PowerPoint slides. It won't stretch them instead. However, if the speaker was able to change those slides to widescreen, that could help substantially, and you wouldn't have that appearance in front of us. Now, at the end of the day, that's just an aesthetic idea. Doing widescreen also has more room for your slides, but in general, it's advisable to have widescreen slides. Now, before you think I'm having a go at Jamie, I actually liked how he did his slides because he referred to them individually, which meant the streamer could actually flick back and forth between him and the PowerPoint slide, something like this. So he's stopped talking about this slide for now, and he's going to continue for another 10 minutes, for instance, and then he'll refer to his next slide. Now, that is possible for us to do, but it only works if you have a small number of slides. If you have lots, our preference will be to leave the slides up there, which means the audience sees less of you. So that's just one comment regarding that. 4 to 3 slides continued. This slide is principally good on the basis that it has reasonably quite large font and a simple background. But you'll notice the slide size, yes, is also 4 to 3, so not as good. But what also happens when we put the corner of him in one of the corners, his picture? Regardless of where I put it, it's going to be difficult to find a spot that can fit the person. Now, to clarify, I didn't approach Lee at this stage because we hadn't finalised how we were going to do this in practice. And I've lost my preset, that's unfortunate. There we go. Okay. I didn't have a chance to contact Lee to see if he could change his slides in any way. And a reminder also that I'm not targeting speakers here or saying their presentations are bad. I'm using these examples with their permission to show the benefit of the principles I outlined earlier. The slides themselves, the content are certainly positive and uplifting, but how we can use them in a practical sense as streaming is often different to what you can imagine. So Brother Bruce, and on a similar front, there is a lot of information on this slide, and that probably would be okay given it is a excerpt from 12 lectures on true teaching of the Bible, and I'm sure there would have been adequate permission for that. But it can be hard to find a position for the speaker once more on the slide. Here we've just had to cut out part of the title, and that's okay. Also, I noticed that a lot of these slides use the design ideas which are on Microsoft PowerPoint, which is all well and good. They are really useful. If you think they look good, use them. That is fine. Just keep in mind you can't edit them how you normally would. They're set format. You can only choose it or not choose it. And you can change your mind, I guess, as well. So that's our 4 to 3 examples and various aspects with them. But have a look now at where 16 to 9 slides make the difference. Not only is there more room for text on the slides, it now looks better on YouTube because it takes up the full screen, because it is the wide screen. Now, Mike successfully left room in the top right corner for the majority of his slides, and he was kept reasonably small, but that probably is not such a bad thing necessarily, depending on the sort of presentation you're aiming for. I do encourage bigger font where possible. It is useful for those at home if they're reading from small screens or such like, but this is still a really good example nonetheless. It's clear, it's concise, and we can fit the speaker in the corner. And in fact, the examples from here get better and better. Aaron Grant was one of my first guinea pigs in how to design slides. I contacted him, asked him to do certain things, and I believe he did a reasonably good job. There were times the streamer had to fade out him for various reasons, but in general, that was okay. And I'm going to move myself there. Because he had a dark background, now it's not black, but that doesn't matter because it's quite dark. So by fading myself out here, now you can read Doomsday nice and clearly. And that's really all we needed to do every now and then to make sure he could read everything on the slides and still see the speaker in some regard. So it is possible for us to do that in a general sense. And a dark background helps with that, as I mentioned earlier. Tim was fantastic and also an example of where black slides can save the day. Now, what you don't realise, just from looking at the stream, is that his slides are actually 4 to 3 as a standard size. So there's black strips down the side of the presentation, but you don't notice it because it's the same colour as the background. So we're all good there. You'll notice his picture is also quite big. He's been able to leave a substantial amount of room on every one of his slides. That stayed the same the whole time. And he used a lot of simple graphics and only small amounts of text. So I enjoyed Tim's presentation quite a lot, and if you didn't get a chance to see it, I encourage you to watch it. Jimmy. Thank you, Jimmy, as well, because he was able to use another strategy of his own idea as well. And he was able to keep his slides consistent in 2 methods. Now, it worked really well, except I was a bit distracted at the start, so I missed one opportunity to change. But he had 2 different layouts and 2 different positions for his face to appear. So the one of them is the one shown now, and the other one is something like this, where we put the picture down the bottom. And that's because he had these graphics from freebibleimages.org, which he was allowed to use, of course. And due to their size, he was able to leave a black strip down the slide, which meant I knew, put the picture down the bottom. By putting it down the bottom, it meant he didn't cover the faces, he only covered less important aspects of the picture. So I'm currently covering one of the faces, but in general, that wasn't the case for his presentation. My point from that is you don't need to use the same corner for every slide. It is useful to have a method for the streamer to understand which corner to use, whether that be a slight different colour change or a certain graphic that's appearing each time, whatever that might be, but in the end, you don't have to use the same corner. And in fact, by moving it around, it keeps the audience attention a little bit better, it keeps them watching and checking. Another thing he was able to use, instead of the text that was on the slide, he had a timeline aspect, which was quite clever, given his topic. And his big main points are nice and big, and he did have some smaller font to back up those points, and that's okay. Alternatively, I'm sure he might have been able to explain them instead of have them on the slide, but that's fine. It worked quite well. So 3 more examples. Dave Finnan's talk is an excellent example of consistency. All of his slides were very consistent. I even had Dad commenting to me about how good Dave's slides were and tell the world sort of idea. And Dave sent me a PDF of the presentation first, so I had a chance to go through. I asked for a couple of minor changes to give him a little bit more room in the corner. But that meant it literally ran like clockwork, and it was an engaging and quite nice looking presentation, really appealing, and overall an extremely good example of a presentation. Matt Oliver is fantastic as well. He was very consistent with the room he had. And together here at Cumberland, before we started, because we had a bit of time, and we always do, we were able to run through all of his slides. So this one, for example, he modified slightly so that we could fit in his picture. So the fearful fires, which you can't quite read, has been moved further to the right so that he'd fit. And that was easy to do and not such a problem. It also highlights that here at Cumberland, we can run through your presentation and show you what it will look like live, to show you how it will appear, how big you are, and you can make any minor changes that you feel necessary in between. Finally, Brother Tony. Now, originally he had a black background and he decided to change it to blue, which aesthetically he enjoyed, which is great. And it's still a nice dark background for us to use, even though we didn't need it. His slides were fantastic, though. He had some nice, simple graphics down in one of the corners the whole time, and he had really good, big font. It was easy to read, clear, concise, and really encouraging. So if you didn't get a chance to watch his Sunday seminar over the Easter weekend on Hope for the World, Christ is Risen, I encourage you to watch it. It really was encouraging and also a great example from my perspective of a neat and really useful presentation. So now I'm going to exit the PowerPoint that I have. It's a keynote presentation. And open up a Scratch keynote presentation and PowerPoint presentation and show you some simple ways that you can easily set up one of these presentations and have it work seamlessly for you. So I'll do that now. if you bear with me. Yep, you can even see my notes down there. So I'll start with a fresh PowerPoint. Obviously, there are lots of themes that you can have in various ways. All of them are good and they're useful. Try and keep the simple idea going, so don't use really complicated colours or graphics or such like, just as a general principle. But if you think it will work for your presentation, please use it. I'm going to use blank for now. So obviously it opens up nice and neat. If you have a more recent version of PowerPoint, it's going to open in widescreen. If it doesn't, you can head to Design and change your slide size to widescreen. So just to point out, if you open it as standard, it's going to look square, almost square. We really want the widescreen format. It gives you more room and it looks better on our presentation. The dark background is nice and easy to find. You just choose it from the options it has. If you were choosing a different one, for example, there's other options that you can find there. There's 4 different colours and you can change them manually easily enough. Now, my best practice for doing a square for you to look at, a rectangle for you to include in one of your corners, is to simply insert a shape. And in fact, what I'll do first, sorry to confuse everyone, is open something called Slide Master. So this is under View. Slide Master is essentially your template for the presentation. There's lots of different variations to your slides that you can choose, different layouts. By changing on here, you change it for everything. So while you're designing the presentation, it's best to do it in Slide Master, so it's in everything. But you can insert your shape, which you just draw approximately, and then go to your height and width. Now, the picture of you will be the same ratio of 16 to 9, so I could just make the height as the smaller number, 16, 9 rather, and the width as 16. And then once I've done that, if I lock the ratios, every time I move this, it stays that same ratio. So this square rectangle would end up as my picture, as where the camera is going to end up on your presentation for the live streaming. Now, the idea of doing a solid square of some colour is so that you know nothing can go behind it, because as soon as you type something behind it, it disappears. So that's the general principle there. As you notice, by changing it on this top one, it's changed it for all of them, and it appears on all of them. So when I close Slide Master, every single layout that I can choose will have it on there to start with. I can also, if I like, change various aspects that are given on each of the things. So I can actually make the title smaller, so that every time I open a title slide, it's already contained within the space that I need. Now, I've actually done this for Microsoft PowerPoint, a simple black and white presentation, and I will just open that so that you get the idea. Also, just to point out, Design Ideas is there. If you were to insert your shape then, or anything for that matter, it will start generating design ideas for how you could potentially show that differently. And if it decides not to do it, so be it. But there you go. So there's lots of different ways it could potentially show that. But as I say, once you choose one of them, you can't change that layout. You can only go back to your original. But no stress there. So I'm just going to close that. Don't save. And open up the suggested speaker presentation that I've put together in my own time. So I've chosen a white square here. Means that when you get here, everything can just, the picture can just appear in that white square. And in fact, all the layouts actually have been formatted to avoid that to avoid that square. None of the text boxes go over it. Some of the texts have been resized, but not many. So I'm happy to share that with you if you so desire. If I were to go to a Keynote and open up a new one, again, you can have lots of different options. Seems Apple give a reasonable amount. Some of them good, some of them bad for presentations, but in general, it's quite simple. Now, I purposely chose this presentation, the basic black, on the sense that all the font was already on the left, and that was useful for me because it meant it was easier to steal a whole quarter for my face. Similar principle with Keynote as to PowerPoint, you can edit the master slide. So by editing the master slide, it has the same choice with what you can do. The only difference being you actually have to copy it to each one. It doesn't have a top base one to start with. If you insert your shape, which is just a square at the moment, you change your width again to 1600. It's in points, so it's a bit bigger. Now that's huge, right? I've just chosen 1600 and 900 because it's nice and easy. You can also choose 450 and 800 if you so desire. So that would be my square, for instance. I can align it at the top and align it on the right so it's in the corner. And then if I copy this, I can paste it in exactly the same position in any slide that I choose. Whenever you copy something in PowerPoint, if you've copied an actual image or text box or shape, it will paste on a different slide in exactly the same position. It's a really good, it's quite useful if you're trying to be really consistent with what you can do on your slide, just as a general tip that you might be able to use. So now when I press done, that is going to appear in all of my title slides moving forward. And when I want to remove it, as in when everything's done and I'm ready to present, I can just delete it from there. Alternatively, I could have just put it on one of the slides and copy and pasted it for each one that I wanted, ignored some of them. That's fine. You don't have to do it through master slides. The benefit of master slides is that you can actually change your text boxes, your default text boxes, to be the correct orientation or the correct size. So that is basically, quite simply and shortly, relatively, a general how-to for designing presentations. Again, this isn't meant to limit what you can do. It is, in fact, meant to encourage you to think about those viewing at home and the sort of system we have at Cumberland to be able to fade in and fade out your presentation. If you had a black slide, we can even do the whole slide behind you. It hasn't worked, apparently, because there's no title. So we can have the presentation a bit like that. Obviously, you're a bit darker. But if you had a small amount of text and you wanted it like that, that's fine. We can also do that. The fading options and the picture-in-picture are quite diverse. We have lots of options and we're quite manual in how we can do it. And we've got presets, so it's quite useful to throw around your image where we can. Interestingly, I don't think we have a bottom left-hand corner, but that's okay. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But in general, it's relatively straightforward. So thank you.